Knowledge series. Today's webinar will focus on assessment and management tools that can help optimize pharmacy productivity and boost overall hospital performance. I'm Pam Andrus, and I'll serve as the moderator for this discussion. The webinar is scheduled to last approximately 1 hour. All participants will be on mute, but please type your questions throughout the webinar as directed on the following screen. For more information on CompleteRx, along with upcoming webinars and events, please visit the CompleteRx.com website. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Michael Tallarico has 15 years of healthcare consulting experience installing strategic cost management programs. As managing partner with Invigorate Healthcare Solutions, he's responsible for oversight for all projects. His areas of expertise include executive leadership to achieve and sustain improvement opportunities and development of software to empower hospital leadership to increase efficiency and effectiveness. Joe Vargas is a Regional Director of Pharmacy Operations with CompleteRx. Joe's responsible for the operational oversight of CompleteRx managed facilities located in the eastern United States. This includes developing and mentoring the management staff, developing pharmacy strategic plans, and ensuring that the pharmacy is providing safe, effective, and cost-effective services. His career spans 35+ years, focused in the areas of hospital pharmacy management, home infusion, and consulting, with 15 years of experience in productivity management. With that, I'll now turn it over to Joe Vargas.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. So let's get started. The hospital pharmacy can be one of the most challenging areas to establish a productivity metric by which to manage the staffing requirement. In the presentation today, we want to accomplish a few goals. First, review the historical and current practice environments in pharmacy. Understand the pros and cons of some of the current options for determining productivity targets. Understand the most common productivity volume metrics and how to choose one. And present best practice options for managing to a productivity standard. Years ago, the hospital pharmacy environment was much different than it is today. The primary function was drug procurement and distribution, maintaining high nursing and physician satisfaction, and ensuring charge capture back when we actually got paid a percentage of charges. During the last 20 years, there have been significant changes in the pharmacy environment. Prospective reimbursement, advent of functional information systems, expansion of clinical pharmacy services, patient safety initiatives, and more pharmacy involvement in revenue cycle. Current practice has evolved into a robust automation management responsibilities, including medication carousels and automated dispensing cabinets, and in some cases robotics for IV preparation. Further expansion of clinical services such as protocol development, clinical decision support, patient safety initiatives, medication use management, decentralization of our pharmacy services, and medication reconciliation. And also much deeper responsibilities in both supply chain, especially recently with the DSCSA pedigree documentation requirements, and also revenue cycle. And of course, we still need to get the medications to our patients. So why productivity management? The underlying goal to any productivity management system is really to be good stewards of scarce resources and ensure the right amount of staffing resource is used efficiently and effectively to maintain safety, quality, and service. Drug expenses make up about 80% of pharmacy costs, so effective drug utilization management by the clinical pharmacy staff can have a significant impact on those expenses. We need efficient use of our resources to effectively improve patient safety through management of drug protocols and clinical decision support, and improve value-based purchasing reimbursement and reduce readmission rates with pharmacist-provided patient medication education. I don't think anyone will disagree that no two pharmacies are the same. Some of the differences can include physical layout limitations, And that can include limitations within the pharmacy and or the layout of the hospital campus itself. The level of automation in place with respect to automated dispensing cabinets, carousel automation, CPOE, etc. Hospital service lines supported. A hospital with a heavy medical oncology practice, for instance, will have a higher pharmacy staffing requirement than a similar pharmacy that doesn't have that service. And then the clinical services provided and the level of decentralization will have an impact on staffing as well. Providing medication histories, med reconciliation, patient rounding, or discharge patient education can all be differentiators between pharmacies. And in some cases, seasonal volume fluctuations if you're located in such an area. The pharmacy is a complex department. It touches almost every other department at multiple levels, including supply chain, clinical, safety, regulatory, and revenue cycle. And the role and complexity of pharmacy management has evolved over the last several years, leading to a reassessment of department staffing requirements. Pharmacies really become a business within a business with responsibilities for information technology, strategic planning, especially as the industry transitions from sickness to wellness, and the focus on outpatient clinics and retail pharmacies adds to the complexity of the regulatory compliance. Meaningful use and the cost of not being compliant, and HCAP scores and readmission rates and their impact on reimbursement. Add to that personnel development and competency assessment.
Hey, Joe, if I may add a little bit here. Hello, everyone. This is Mike Tallarico with EHS. And the reason we're going through these first initial slides to talk about pharmacy and really its strategic objectives or initiatives and how those strategic objectives relate to the overall hospital strategic plan. Anytime we talk about productivity, we always seem to focus on, okay, how do we reduce our costs? How do we get leaner and provide service with less resources? And that is not necessarily the role of productivity when we're discussing pharmacy departments. Pharmacy departments today offer a lot more value than just simply producing a unit dose. So we have to understand the current skill requirements and the current initiatives before we can ever talk about an appropriate staffing target. So the point of these initial slides really is to reiterate that, as Joe said a moment ago, no two pharmacies are alike, and neither are two hospitals. So you have to understand the strategic objectives of the organization, the high-level strategic plan, and then how you define what the pharmacy's plan is as it relates to that high-level strategic plan, and then we can talk about developing a department-specific productivity goal.
Thanks, Mike. So the productivity management tools currently available to us fall into three general categories. Benchmarking services, which are external benchmarking, self-benchmarking, which is internal benchmarking, and then productivity and workflow assessment, which is typically a consult service. We're going to go over each of these in the next few slides.
Okay, so we want to make this as interactive as we can possibly make a webinar, and we're going to go ahead and launch a poll question. And what we want to do is see everyone that's attending this webinar, what tool, if any, are you utilizing? What productivity management tool is being used in your facility? Is it internal benchmarking, consulting, external benchmarking, or none of the above? And if you'll please respond to the polling question, we'll be able to share those results momentarily. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the polls. And we'll see that it's pretty evenly distributed, Joe and Michael. We've got 31% with internal benchmarking, consulting is about 23%, external is 23%, and then none of the above is 23% as well. Okay, thank you all. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Next slide. So the first type of productivity management tool are external benchmarking services, and there's several available. They go by several names such as Quantify, Insights, and Operations Advisor, to name a few. The main advantages to using an external benchmarking service is that it's fairly easy to implement, moderate to no cost involved, and there is a lot of data available from a comparison standpoint. The challenges are that it's not very specific to the individual operation. We mentioned earlier, for instance, no two pharmacies are the same. I would say one of the biggest disadvantages is peer group mismatch. Hospitals tend to pick peer groups based on hospital type, for instance, for-profit, not-for-profit, community hospital versus medical center, and then also their bed size, payer mix, and maybe case mix index. In the case of the pharmacy, elements like service lines supported, clinical services provided, pharmacy intensity score, and the level of automation may be more important metrics to use when picking a peer group. Another challenge is cherry picking of pharmacy indicators. With these benchmarking services, there are several pharmacy productivity indicators, each of which can have a significantly different impact on target staffing levels. Benchmarking service also provides a target but no specific guidance on how to improve workflows to achieve that target. And using these benchmarking services, there's no buy-in from the staff because there's very little, if any, staff engagement in the process.
Joe, if I can elaborate a little more on this slide. We work with a lot of organizations that use benchmarking services. And what we find is if a department or a pharmacy is doing well relative to their peer group comparison, well, then they maintain the status quo. If they're doing great against the benchmark, then obviously they're applauded, and that's pretty much the end of the conversation. If they're not achieving the benchmark, or at least the percentile expected, the conversation turns to, okay, why is the benchmark invalid? So we see a lot of clients spending time trying to normalize data or at least validate the comparison when much more effort is required to say, okay, where is the gap and how do we improve the operation of the department? So when we say there's no buy-in, that may be one of the most important parts on this slide. If the department manager does not believe in the staffing target or goal that has been established, then we spend our time really refuting the validity of the target. And in our experience, if you want effective change, we need to make sure that the target is agreed to by the department leadership and the staff that reside in that department. That'll lead to the workflow improvements, that'll lead to the cost improvements and the quality improvements. So the benchmarking services, it's a very important process in comparing yourself to other organizations, but that is only one small step in achieving productivity improvement.
Great, thanks, Mike. So the second type of productivity management tool is self-benchmarking or internal benchmarking. Advantages here are that this type of benchmarking is easy to implement, typically using a best period average as a starting point for a target.
Yeah, that is another dangerous approach, and I say dangerous because it really reiterates the status quo. Many pharmacies today are challenged with, can we do things better with less staff, less cost? And if we go through the budget process and we say, all right, last year we operated at this level and therefore we're going to do the same next year, we're not really creating an impetus for change and improvement.
Right, agreed. There's some of the other advantages. There's little no cost, and it's specific to the existing operation, but certainly is based on the status quo. And again, like the external benchmarking services, there's no specific guidance on how to improve. The third type of productivity management tool is a productivity and workflow assessment. And this is typically a consult service. Advantages here include evaluation against best practice, typically through a gap analysis tool. And there's several excellent tools available out there through our professional organizations. The resulting target is customized to the department's and hospital's specific environment and their staff involvement and engagement in the process by design. It provides specific workload requirements by skill mix and by time of day.
And obviously, we saved the best for last. This is by far the best approach to productivity improvement. Many times, if you consult or you ask for an external organization to give you a productivity target, they will give you a number, and there will be a variance that may indicate that you were overstaffed or understaffed, but there's no real guidance as to how to get there. So if you want to truly achieve productivity improvement, you have to set a target that's appropriate for your organization and then spend your time and energy on developing the plan to get there and getting your staff engaged, everyone in the department, so they understand the high-level goal and what the department, and more importantly, what the organization is trying to achieve, is very valuable and relevant to success, especially long-term success.
Correct. Thanks, Mike. And it does, it will identify mismatches and specific mismatches in the workload to the staffing resource, and provides that functional tool that's easy to review and revise. And there's really very few, if any, disadvantages. It does require departmental resources to complete the data collection and the evaluation of the workload design, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. As Mike mentioned, it provides for that staff engagement, which is important to successful implementation. One of the decisions to be made when implementing a productivity target is the selection of a volume indicator. So what is a volume indicator? It's the indicator that the pharmacy's target will be based upon. Typically, or basically used as a surrogate for all of the activities required to provide pharmacy services based on volume. And it's the denominator in the productivity target. For example, if adjusted patient days are being used as the volume indicator, a productivity target may be 0.54 hours worked per adjusted patient day. So adjusted patient day is your volume indicator.
And I would like to add here, Joe, most times people think of a single major volume indicator, and they look at a metric and they say, this metric does not represent all the work that we do. And that is a true statement. We use a single metric, a single major volume indicator, as the primary driver of our workload. But in order for a target and a staffing goal to be valid, that target has to incorporate not only the activities related to that major volume indicator, but all of the indirect and constant activities that a department is responsible for. We've struggled really with what is the most appropriate volume indicator, and that is why we put the comment at the bottom of this slide that there is no perfect indicator. Traditionally, we used to use unit doses, billed unit doses. That was a metric that was valid and easily captured. Today, it's a little more difficult to capture, and there has been a move in the industry to move towards adjusted patient days or pharmacy patient days. Those are both valid indicators, providing that the target incorporates all of the initiatives and workload that the pharmacy provides.
Great. Thanks. So, talking about volume indicators, some of the common volume indicators for pharmacy are listed here. For those of you that are really fast at math, you'll notice the percentage is greater than 100, and that's because the respondents in this particular survey were instructed to select all applicable indicators, and some picked more than one because they may have had more than one indicator against which they were being measured. But doses is listed there, and that may be doses billed, doses dispensed, or doses administered. Adjusted patient days was next, and that could be a hospital adjusted patient day or a pharmacy adjusted patient day. Orders processed, patient days, and case mix index adjusted patient days. And you can see the breakdown on the slide.
And so we're going to launch our own survey and get all of our participants to respond to which pharmacy volume indicator is currently utilized in your facility. And if applicable, please check one of the answers below. And while we're waiting for the poll to be completed, Joe and Michael, what in your experience tends to be the most utilized? Does it fall in line with the pie chart here from the previous survey?
Well, personally, I think even though this study is a little dated, it's still, I think, is fairly accurate. There's maybe been a little bit more movement from doses to adjusted patient days and orders processed, but I think the breakdown will be fairly similar to what we see here. Mike, I don't know if you're probably a little closer to this than I am.
Yeah, we see just about the same breakout, but I would recommend that if you're going to go through a productivity initiative and you do select adjusted patient days as an example as the major volume indicator, you should still pull what I would consider the major workload, which is unit doses dispensed. So there should be a ratio, an understanding for a significant sample of time that says if we're using adjusted patient days, this is the doses, the major workload that we do relative to that volume. And then probably every 6 months or at a minimum every year, pull the data again and validate that the ratio is still appropriate. Because adjusted patient days, it can go up or down, and that does not necessarily mean your workload has changed. You still need a department-specific metric, such as billed unit doses, to relate back to the adjusted patient days.
Okay, so let's see what our attendees responded with. And it falls in line with exactly what you guys were discussing, more adjusted patient days in terms of the volume indicators, but pretty well broken up with just patient days not being a very popular metric or indicator.
Okay, great, thanks. Next slide. So we won't go through this entire slide, and it certainly is not all-inclusive, but any productivity target must include, as we've been mentioning all along, all workload drivers. There are many activities involved in the medication use cycle, and that includes the distributive, operational, patient safety, and clinical functions. Activities are considered variable activities when they're driven by the inpatient and outpatient volumes. Some of the main workload drivers are orders processed, doses dispensed, and that would include the automated dispensing fill, check, and delivery process, dispensing first doses, IVs prepared, chemo doses prepared, dosing protocols, and multidisciplinary rounding in the case of clinical activities. And these are just for reference. Again, this is not all inclusive, but just to give you an idea that it is important to make sure to include all those workload drivers.
Joe, let me add here too. We're looking at the pharmacy workload drivers, and if you go through and measure the amount of time you spend doing these activities and you relate it back to a major volume indicator, you will establish an appropriate target. But as Joe indicated at the beginning of the presentation, what we established today is the appropriate staffing target, productivity goal. It will evolve as the pharmacy's role evolves. So this is not a one and done type scenario. You need to revisit this routinely and make sure that you adjust the target accordingly if you take on additional activities or tasks.
That's an important point, Mike. Thank you. There are also a list of workload drivers that are considered constants, in other words, independent of patient volumes. Again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but just an example of some of those constant activities that have to be considered when determining staffing requirements. These are activities that are done on a regular basis, depending on the activity, and again, are irrespective of those patient volumes.
All right, Joe, let me take it from here. We want to talk a little bit about workflow evaluation and redesign. And one of the most important elements of effective productivity improvement is completing this type of analysis, understanding how your department functions, And when you go through this type of analysis, you'll gain a thorough understanding of what you need to do to be successful. Many organizations use maybe an internal lean process, or they may bring in an outside consultant to help them walk through these steps. The goal of the process is to identify where do we have rework or duplication of effort within our existing processes so we can eliminate some steps, identify staffing and workload mismatches through time of day analysis. Most organizations, they have a schedule. They set that schedule and it's maintained throughout the day, even though that certain times of the day the department may be underwater because there's so much work to be done, and then they'll hit a lull at a later point in the day. And then one of the best benefits of this process is to identify barriers, workflow barriers. Pharmacy does not operate in a silo. You're dependent on interactions with departments throughout the entire organization, including physicians. So if you have barriers to workflow, it's best to take a lean approach and engage the other departments and the physicians in some sort of conversation to see if we can remove those barriers. Automation and optimization of the automation that you have is extremely important. We invest a lot of time, money, effort in becoming a more automated department, and if we do that, we have to make sure that we're achieving the defined benefits of the investment in that automation. Shift lengths. Most organizations have a very specific shift length. We're going to have an 8-hour day or a 12-hour day, or in some cases 10-hour days. As I said a moment ago, the workload doesn't flow according to our shifts. So understanding where the work is greatest and staffing accordingly will improve employee satisfaction. It may reduce burnout and make you a more effective department. These are just a few of the areas that we should identify when you go through a workflow redesign and evaluation. But if you're going to truly improve productivity, you have to understand that the elements of your department that you're going to change. It doesn't simply mean you're going to get a new number and therefore you're going to achieve productivity improvement. If you go through a productivity initiative and you develop a target and you identify a major volume indicator, developing a management action plan, your reaction to the target, is probably the most difficult and the most important aspect of productivity improvement. This management action plan has to be done at the conclusion of the establishment of the target, but then you have to identify where the gaps are. What are we going to change? What are we going to improve to actually achieve the target? Doing that requires an understanding of the management structure, the overhead personnel inside the department, understanding my skill mix, and then also understanding what levers I can pull to improve. The workflow redesign and the roles and responsibilities. Many organizations are looking at their staff and skill mix, and they're asking a question: can we do certain activities with a different skill, maybe a more effective skill? And if that's the case, then we're going to make adjustments where possible. Looking at overtime, the use of overtime or agency, flexible staff, PRN staff. Can you obtain people that will work swing shifts during those high volume periods? And then fully leveraging your technician staff. If you've got pharmacists, let's get those pharmacists doing the activities that are the most value to the organization. Always invest in training and competency assessments, and make sure you've got the right people fully trained and engaged in understanding the strategic plan of the department.
One more point, Mike, as far as how long it takes to achieve the objective, and that's really dependent on the complexity of the changes involved and to some extent direction from leadership as far as the approach they're going to take. And very often, one of the things we're always thinking about is staff reduction, and what we're seeing lately is, rather than staff reduction, if there is opportunity in the department, possibly redeploying those resources to provide some additional activities or functions that haven't been able to get to yet. The other thing I just want to mention quickly is flexibility, and I know this is a challenge, especially for those pharmacies where the pharmacist staff may be salaried. And the key there, I think, is finding what your core staff is, maybe based on your average volume, and then utilizing PRN or part-time staff to supplement that and help flex in a situation where you do have salaried staff. Especially challenging in a seasonal environment, it's almost imperative that you have that PRN and part-time staff to be able to flex up and down to the volumes.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, just to reiterate a point that you mentioned that I may have overlooked, if you develop a management action plan, it is paramount that you identify what activities you're going to change, then you identify who owns those activities, and then set a timeline that's appropriate for your organization. Change does not come easy or quickly. So developing a structured management action plan and submitting it to your executive in a way that says, this is how I'm going to improve, and looking at it as a definition of how and what needs to change, and more importantly, put the executive in a position where they can support the management action plan. The only way that you can truly achieve productivity improvement is to get the buy-in and support of executive leadership and physician leadership.
Okay.
So, key drivers for success. As we may have missed a slide there. Nope, I apologize, we did not. So as we near the end of the presentation, let's review the key elements of a successful productivity plan. Be decisive. You need to select a process that will enable your department to decide or develop a hospital-specific target, one that you believe in and buy in. Determine the best single volume indicator and validate it for consistent accuracy. And then measure how you're doing versus the goal. We tell hospital clients all the time, productivity needs to be a recurring conversation. We have to review on a daily basis how we're doing relative to volume. We have to look at it on a biweekly basis, and then we have to react. If volumes are increasing and we need additional staff, it is necessary to bring the additional staff in. The flip side, obviously, is if we hit a slow period and the hospital needs to contract, then pharmacy should probably follow suit as well. But the most important aspect is talking and sharing this information with your staff. If your staff believes in productivity and it becomes part of the culture, they will embrace it. It'll become, something that they understand, and they won't hold against management for making some of these hard decisions. Share your challenges, and more importantly, share your successes. If you empower creativity and change, you'll be amazed how many department staff will come to you with ideas and suggestions on how you can improve the process. And please remember, this is a process that never ends. Hospitals are changing, our industry is changing, the pharmacy departments are changing, and we will need to continue to find ways to improve how we deliver service.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. The ongoing review process with staff involvement is a really important element that often gets overlooked. We mentioned how much change has occurred in pharmacy over time, and there's no indication that trend's not going to continue. So without an ongoing review process, the tools that we develop can lose their relevance over time, sometimes fairly quickly.
We wanted to share with you a sample staffing grid for a pharmacy, just to give you an idea as to how to define a staffing target and then how to communicate that staffing target down through your department. And what you'll see in this sample staffing matrix is we're measuring adjusted patient days. That's the from to in the top left corner. This particular example shows their biweekly volume, and then it shows their staff allocation, fixed, central pharmacist, all the different skills inside the department. At the very far right, you'll see a target of 0.5383. This tells the department, if I schedule my staff in the following way and my volume stays within this range, I will achieve the defined productivity goal. This clearly defines Okay, if my volume increases or decreases, I know the adjustments I need to make to maintain that productivity goal. Now, again, adjusted patient days is a very good indicator, but it needs to be validated at least once a year so that when you look at adjusted patient days relative to billed unit doses, you get an idea that the ratio is maintained and consistent. Using this type of information and understanding how the target relates to staffing, it will help you better go through the budget process. You project your volume for the coming year, and if you plug in your target, you should get a pretty good idea of the staff requirements for the coming budget process. It also is very important in the employee requisition process. If you lose a staff member and you have an open position and you're getting challenged by the committee that's responsible for employee requisition, having this type of information to say, here's my volume, this is what's required for me to operate within the acceptable productivity target, it will make a very simple, quick conversation about whether or not to fill an open position. This document also will facilitate the management action plan we just discussed. If there is a variance in certain skills and positions, it will clearly jump out at you. You'll know exactly where your overage or your understaffed situation is, and then you can respond accordingly. The next screen here, this is a snapshot of a pharmacy productivity dashboard. You've heard us say a moment ago, communication is vital to ongoing productivity improvement. We use productivity reporting. We look at it every 2 weeks retrospectively. If you look at a productivity report and you analyze your utilization, that's the number in the top left corner at 97.94%, it indicates that this department is operating well within their productivity goal. That is good information to share with your staff, because as you're setting schedules and you're filling open positions, if they understand and see how the department's doing from a utilization standpoint, then they're tuned in with you. The target hours per unit to the right of that is going to be a department-specific target. So if you've got a clinical pharmacist initiative and you need to build in additional staff, obviously the target's going to be higher than in the sample we just showed a moment ago. Your actual hours per unit is calculated simply by looking at the volume, the adjusted patient days for the biweekly average relative to the total number of productive FTEs. And please note that when you're looking at productivity, it's better to focus on productive FTEs, FTEs that come to work, because that's what you need to get the work done, as opposed to paid FTEs. But we do include an analysis of cost, payroll analysis. So in this example where you see productivity analysis, 97% means they're slightly overstaffed, and there is a cost opportunity, a financial impact. And then to the right where you see payroll analysis, we can make a comparison of our budget hourly rate versus our average hourly rate. So in this example, when you see a financial opportunity of $5,261, that's the combination of the payroll analysis and the productivity analysis. Good information. It's biweekly. You'll see history in the bottom left. You can chart your productive hours per unit. You can chart your volumes or your productive FTEs or your use of overtime. You need some form of tool that's transparent, that's easily communicated and shared with executive leadership all the way down to your staff. Without consistent, clear productivity reporting, it's very difficult to manage to a productivity goal.
So again, determining the correct staffing target allows us to properly staff, deploy, and manage our pharmacy clinicians and support staff, and can have a powerful impact on patient safety, patient and provider satisfaction, and medication cost management.
And to add to that, Joe, the pharmacy productivity, it is not simply hours and FTEs relative to volume. There's a lot of good initiatives inside pharmacy today that have to be built into the target that may not be directly related to billed unit doses. Understanding those and incorporating them into the target will make sure that your productivity goal is aligned with the strategic goal of the organization.
All right, thank you, both Michael and Joe, for this great webinar and for all the information that you've shared today. We also want to thank all of our participants, and the webinar with audio will be uploaded to the Knowledge Series section of the CompleteRx website, where you can download it at your convenience. It's going to take a couple of days to get it uploaded, so participants will receive an email notification when the recorded webinar is available. And we're going to go ahead and move on to questions, and the first one we have is one that I think we all anticipated. How often do these assessments result in workforce reductions versus redeployment of resources, as was discussed in the webinar?
Mike, you're probably more frontline on this one, so I'll let you go ahead and take this one.
You know, most of the organizations that we work with today are financially sound. So when opportunities for improvement are identified in a pharmacy department, most clients today are redeploying those FTEs into other activities to improve quality and service. Only hospitals that have a financial need to reduce staff are going through any kind of reduction in force. So if I was going to put a percentage on it, it's probably 90 to 10. Many hospitals, especially ones that have a little more difficulty finding quality pharmacists and tech staff, they're going to hold on to that staff. So even if there is an overage and they don't have the opportunity to redeploy them, they'll let attrition take its course. So it's not necessarily a RIF, it's more of a redeployment, or we'll just let nature and attrition take its course.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We appreciate it. In terms of dollars, what are some realistic expectations for pharmacies with workflow redeployment of a workflow redesign and a productivity?
Mike, as I remember, I mean, the ones that I've been through, I can say on average, you're probably looking at somewhere between a 5 to 7% opportunity for improvement, and but again, that can vary widely. I mean, I've also seen numbers as high as 10 to 15%, and again, that may be some combination of staff redeployment and reduction, but we are seeing with the advent of some of the transition of care issues and the reimbursement based on core measures and readmission rates, redeploying pharmacists to be involved in multidisciplinary rounding, discharge patient education, pain management. So you know, that's not all staff reduction. A lot of that is redeployment.
Yeah, generally speaking, from a productivity standpoint, we see opportunity for improvement in the 3% to 8% range. And as Joe indicated, that doesn't mean every department falls into that category, and that means most pharmacies today, they're staffed appropriately. We don't see a lot of opportunity for improvement in pharmacy departments, and it goes back to a lot of the points Joe just made. You know, hospitals are investing in growing pharmacy because of the role that they play, the clinical pharmacists, and their ability to control cost and control patient safety and quality. It's an investment that most organizations are willing to make. So we're not seeing a lot of cost savings in pharmacies.
Okay, and in terms of deployment of the workflow redesign, about how long does that take to implement?
Again, that's going to depend on I'll say the severity of the change. Many hospitals and pharmacies are looking at, you know, action plans that can be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. If they're going through a pretty significant change in workflow and possible redeployment of staff, it can be anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. Some of the drivers on that are going to be the financial need. Organizations that are financially sound, they're going to take their time and do it right.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, all right, and next question. What are some of the key strategic initiatives that your clients are involved in that relate to care management? And it says not traditional utilization or brand versus generic used.
You know, I would say based on what's occurring currently and a big focus on transitions of care, especially as patients go from inpatient to outpatient. I think those are some of the care management challenges and focus that a lot of hospitals are looking at. How do we effectively transition the patients from inpatient to outpatient, make sure that their care in the outpatient setting is being provided for, and manage our readmission rates, among other things, as we go through that transition of care.
Okay, and our next question, how many pharmacies hire their pharmacist as exempt versus hourly? And then do you have any data, cost of cancer drugs versus reimbursement, with budget always being an issue, as those expenses are being reviewed in a lot of detail? Is that another question? I'm sorry. Oh, that was a separate question. So we'll start with how many pharmacies hire pharmacists that are exempt versus hourly. I apologize.
That's okay. I would say that has been and continues to stay pretty much 50-50 from my experience in involvement in the pharmacies I've been involved in. It's pretty much 50-50, or very close to it.
I would agree with that, Joe. I'm seeing just about the same breakdown.
What was the other one?
Okay, and the question that I tried to lump it in with is, do you have any data regarding cost versus cancer drugs versus reimbursement, with budget always being an issue and those expenses, you know, obviously oncology programs
right.
growing, not just in terms of volume, but expense as well. There's been a lot of research and a lot of articles recently out there.
Right. A little off topic, but I would say that we've been in facilities that could not answer the question as to whether their oncology service was making money or breaking even. I think it's very difficult for some hospitals to manage the data. But what I will say is, certainly if you are a 340B hospital, you have a much better chance of being able to break even and have that service line be profitable. But there are some things that can be done as far as dose management, certainly making sure that the billing is correct on the revenue cycle side with the J codes and billable units, and we find a lot of issues there, as well as making sure that, for instance, on the multi-dose vials, if the additional portion can be used, that it's not wasted, and of course billing appropriately for the single dose vials. And there is a JW code modifier that you can use on the single dose vials for waste. So implementing programs to optimize your reimbursement, I think, is critical to at least a break-even situation on the oncology side.
Okay, and I know this is going to be a plug to the CompleteRx Knowledge Series website, but we do have a white paper on that site specific to oncology drugs, and would direct everyone to go to that website, specifically to our white paper section, and there's additional papers as well, but it's definitely relevant to this question. And then our next question, are there any special considerations that must be taken into consideration when evaluating and managing productivity in a union environment? That's a great question.
That is a great question, and it really depends on the union agreement and what's built into that. So, there's not a specific answer to that. I think it really depends on the agreement and working within that agreement, and working with the union in identifying what the goals are and where the opportunity is, and how that can be achieved.
And let me add to that. Let me add to that real quick. Anytime we work with a unionized facility, we're very transparent. So if you engage the union and show them the process that you're going to go through to implement a productivity target, they will not dispute that process, and they won't dispute the target that is arrived at. Where the union tends to get a little more sensitive is how you implement the change. So going through that management action plan and how you're going to reallocate or redeploy resources, or in some cases, reduce them through attrition, that's really where the union gets more concerned. So setting a goal, as long as you're upfront and honest and transparent with them, they usually have no real complaints.
Okay, so the next question, this is kind of a long one, and I'm reading from the screen. We have a patented software and equipment that's used in our pharmacy that's approved for use by Ohio State Pharmacy Board. So it's pharmacy medication verification that eliminates the pharmacist's time in checking all but 10% of the orders processed. It's allowed us to use pharmacist time much more valuable way. Is there a way using your benchmarking to determine the value of this in the marketplace using your metrics or your benchmarking?
Joe, I can talk to that a little bit. If I completely understood the question, if you have a technology or a software application that improves the workflow inside of a pharmacy, then we can measure the volume relative to the staff or the cost associated to complete the workload. And comparing that to the benchmark, if you take a large pharmacy and you can run at an hours per unit target that's 20% better than the norm or the median inside of a select peer group, then yeah, we can quantify what the value is.
Yeah, and as I understand it, I guess you know, if you're using your workflow redesign, the process that you have in place is going to be incorporated into that data collection and that workload redesign. But if you're talking about benchmarking and comparing to benchmarking, you know, as Mike said, you would want to quantify the financial benefit and the fact that you are redeploying those resources in a more effective way to either, you know, improve patient care, patient safety, or manage drug utilization.
Thank you. All right. I want to thank again both of our speakers, Joe Vargas and Michael Tallarico, and also all of our webinar participants today. This concludes our webinar. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email Joe Vargas at the email address that's listed on the slide, and you guys have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.